Okay. I'm Eric. I work at If This Then That, or IFT, and we use RecyclerView a lot, as I imagine most modern applications do today. So to start, how many people have used and are using ItemTouchHelper in their RecyclerView? Okay, cool. So for everybody else, I'm hoping I can convince you that ItemTouchHelper is easy enough to get started with and friendly enough to get into your apps like next week. I really think it's that easy and powerful to use. So here's an example in one of our apps. This happens to be Do Button, where we used it. Actually, the week we were planning this feature was the week that I believe RecyclerView or the support library 22.2 came out and added ItemTouchHelper. It was amazing. It was perfect timing for us. But I pulled this out to show an example of it has swiping, it has dragging and dropping, and it also kind of has this footer view that is kind of excluded from the dragging and dropping functionality. So without ItemTouchHelper, this could be super complex, could use up a lot of developer time, but it's actually pretty simple to do with ItemTouchHelper. Before RecyclerView, so is anybody still using ListView? Okay. Yeah, some people. I think ItemTouchHelper is one of the biggest reasons why you should migrate to RecyclerView. Before we had RecyclerView, quick history, we had ListView, and animation was really tough. I know Chet had multiple dev bites on it years ago. As a novice developer, I was like copying and pasting code. I was trying to figure out what this code was doing. Here we have an example with a view tree observer trying to get different states. You would need to use view.setTransient state before you started doing any animations to make sure the list view wouldn't try to recycle your view while it's animating. And then you'd have to remember to set the transient state to false when you finish animating. It was pretty complicated. And this is in large part because we didn't have the separation of the layout manager model in ListView like we do in RecyclerView. And RecyclerView's layout manager really handles a lot of the child view interactions for us, as we'll see in a minute. So yes, RecyclerView, the savior, saves a bunch of time, separates a lot of the concerns. Support, it's in the support library. You can use it. Use RecyclerView. So ItemTouchHelper is really made up of two things: RecyclerView.on ItemTouchListener, which has which is an interface with three methods, and the most important one being on intercept touch event. So it's a way to capture these motion events in your RecyclerView and apply them to the children, which you can do manually, but ItemTouchHelper provides this implementation in great part for you. The second part is item decoration. For those not familiar with item decoration, it's a way to provide the children of a RecyclerView, the items in RecyclerView, with different decorations, and you can draw on the canvas and such. But ItemTouchHelper extends item decoration, and so ItemTouchHelper is a combination of the touch listener for a lot of your swiping and motion events, and then for a lot of your dragging and motion events, and item decoration for a lot of your dragging motion events as it translates the view within a row. ItemTouchHelper, super easy to get started with. You supply it a callback in the constructor, and and callback is you just implement the callback, and then you attach it to RecyclerView, and the ItemTouchHelper then attaches the item decoration to the RecyclerView. It attaches the on-item-touch listener to the RecyclerView, and it sets up all those callbacks for you. So again, very easy to get started with. So the callback that you provide to the ItemTouchHelper. The bare bones here are 3 abstract methods that you need to implement. That's get movement flags, and this is where you'll supply whether you want to support left, right, or start, end, and up and down. What kind of drag and swipe events that you want to support in your RecyclerView. On move, and this is where you get your callback for the actual dragging of the items. So like in a common example, in a linear layout manager, you might have a vertical linear layout manager in a lot of cases, and your on move is where you're going to be where you're going to have this drag implementation, maybe like to swipe or to rearrange items within the RecyclerView. And then on swiped, which is going back to the example of vertical linear layout manager. This is where you might dismiss items or archive items, basically like swiping left to right or start to end in the vertical example. It's important to note that on move isn't going to get called unless you support dragging, and on swiped is not going to get called unless you support swiping, and that's based on the movement flags that you provide to get movement flags. So starting with get movement flags, very handy convenience method in ItemTouchHelper called make movement flags, which will create the flags for you. You supply the drag flags that you'll support. Again, up, down, start, end, left, right, depending on your orientation or your use case for your layout manager, and the swipe flags and similar. So yes, this composes your drag and swipe flags, and it really can be as simple as up, down, start, end. If you like in that first video example, want to support both rearranging and like swiping to delete or to dismiss. On move, so this is for your dragging and dropping, like rearranging in most cases. Important thing to remember, again, this is very easy, but remember to update your data, of course, in your adapter, and to notify the adapter. I mean, same as always, when you have, this is normally something you might do automatically, but on move is direct user interaction. So remember to sort your data appropriately, and then in this basic example, like we moved one item to another position, and we just notify what's swapped there. Yes, and then the first view holder there is the view holder that it came from, that was moved, and then the target is the one that it was dropped. The target is the view holder that was dropped onto in the drag interaction. So more supporting dragging. 2 ways you can really enable your user to support dragging. Most obvious and is really a sane default, and again, I really appreciate the API having these like great defaults, is long press enabled. By default, when you long press on an item, on the root item in the view holder, you will enter the drag. I mean, assuming that your flag supported it, you will enter the drag mode, and your user will enter that. But in a lot of cases, you might want to override that. You don't want to support long pressing and dragging. Maybe your app, it's just not a discoverable feature for you. You can override that, return faults there, and you can totally do it manually. You can get a hold of your ItemTouchHelper instance and just manually call start drag on the view holder that you want your user to start dragging. This is especially I think you see this a lot in cases where you have maybe like hooks, or like in Google Music where you have like a little hamburger icon, and the user can drag from there rather than long pressing. So I appreciate the API is like very flexible in that case, but still provides a really good default for long pressing. Then one more thing on dragging. So back in that first video, I showed like a case where we had kind of a footer view, and we didn't want a user, it didn't make sense for a user to put a recipe in that case, or an item in the list on top, or to replace a footer view. So so we had this handy, this is optional, it's not abstract, but you can override it in the callback, called can drop over. And there, again, we just supplied the view holders, and based on certain cases, we, like it's a footer view or a header view, or maybe it's just a disabled item in your list. We say, we just tell the ItemTouchHelper, we don't want to be able to drop onto this view. Just cancel that interaction, and you do that simply by returning faults. So it's a fairly common case and worth pointing out. So the second abstract method that we need to implement in our callback, on-swiped. So this is typically when, like back to the simple case, I think the most common case of a vertical linear layout manager, when we want to swipe to dismiss, or to delete, or to archive, or other such actions. Again, no different. Remember to update your data. Remember to notify your adapter of the UI change. And the very handy thing is we're supplied the direction. So again, back to the flags that we provided. If we supported swiping left and right, for example, or start and end, it might be handy to dismiss when a user swipes left, but to archive when a user swipes right. So that direction is just that flag that we allowed in the get supported flags method. So yeah, there again, just notifying removed in that case. If it's like a deleted item, that's a very simple case. Similarly, we have some sane defaults here. The is item swipe enabled. It actually returns true by default. And which makes sense, because when a user starts swiping left and right on your view, he probably wants to dismiss it. But then again, you could override that. You could return faults, and maybe based on some other interaction, you can do this all manually by manually calling start swipe on the ItemTouchHelper, and then the user will go into this swipe mode, this swipe interaction, and begin swiping in the direction that you've allowed. So easiest custom animations that I think are worth pointing out is, so there are three action states. There's idle, swipe, and drag, as we've been saying. But we have an onSelected change hook, and we also have a clear view hook. This is really handy when we start entering these interaction modes and when we exit these interaction modes. So by default, and the reason like in this example I call it super, by default actually on Lollipop, you'll when you start dragging, you'll get an elevation. You'll get an elevation set on your root view in the the view holder. To give the user context that like it's being selected over the current content. But you can totally override that functionality. You could just not call super. In this example, very simple example, you might want to animate, you might want to grow the view that the user is selecting as he's dragging to give more context. And then just remember to clear any view that you start in the onSelected. And there again, we're handed the action state. So you might only want to enable this for dragging. Maybe swiping doesn't make sense to start animating growth or shrinking when the user is interacting with the item. There's a lot more to customize. I don't want to get into it because I think the methods are pretty self-explanatory, and also you can read the docs, very self-explanatory. I just thought worth pointing out, you can override thresholds for escape velocity on swiping. You can override when it's actually a swipe. By default, I believe ItemTouchHelper provides, again, really great defaults. Half of the width when you're swiping left counts as a swipe when the user starts entering the swipe interaction. But yeah, very easy to customize there. Bounding box margin might not be so obvious, but that's just more hit region if you want to expand the touch target for entering the action rather than just the view's standard hit target. So again, ItemTouchHelper is just an item decoration. In fact, it extends it. It literally is a item decoration, except it also provides some really cool hooks in that. So item decoration gives you just the bare bones. It'll give you the canvas and the recycler view, and then if you need more, you can change the offsets of child views. But again, you can customize more with the ItemTouchHelper. You can override on child draw and provide whatever other functionality you might want to provide. The offsets there, dx and dy. Again, you have the action state as always, and then is currently active is simply whether it's in user interaction, if the user is actually interacting with it, or false if it's just like sliding back into place, if the ItemTouchHelper is automatically providing that interaction, such as like if a user cancels the action or removes his finger and it's sliding back into space. But more hooks there for extra things. So here's another basic example to show why that might be useful. Fading. Maybe you have a list. You have an email app, and you want to show the email fades as the user swipes to delete it. Yeah, there we check to see if it's a swipe. So we don't want to do this on a drag, obviously, but and then we can just change the alpha based on the offset that that the user has swiped so far. Oh, and then of course we provide super just so that other interactions like dragging can also provide their elevation and all the default behavior if we want to allow that. So final thing, for custom layout managers, this is a really super trick that I learned fairly recently. If you're using a custom layout manager, all you have to do is implement view drop handler, and you'll actually get its callback on moved from ItemTouchHelper's prepare for drop. From its on move. It simply checks if your layout manager is an instance of view drop handler, and if it is, then it'll give you that hook to let you know that an item is about to be dropped. So that can be handy to cancel any animations, or even to provide any animations that an item has been released by the user. So yeah, make magical experiences. I hope I convinced people that ItemTouchHelper is easy to use. It's simply a combination of item decoration and on ItemTouchHelper, on Item Touch Listener, and really for the bare bones of getting it started, you just have to implement 3 methods in a callback, and you can get your swipe, drag functionality and rearranging functionality for basically no cost. Thank you.